Shrink the Nation is a podcast for thoughtful, informed adults, preferably with a pour in hand. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the hosts and guests only and do not reflect the views of any employers, institutions, licensing boards, government agencies, bourbon distilleries, or family members, especially our family members. They've asked us to be very clear about that. This show is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said here should be taken as medical, psychiatric, legal, or professional advice. If you're in crisis, call a professional. If you're mad at something we said, we suggest journaling or emailing us with civility. We're here to challenge ideas, not diagnose strangers. We're clinicians, not your clinicians, and we have the bourbon to prove it. Let's go. We're not doing mysticism tonight. No crystals, no incense. Clinically, the shadow is simple. The traits we refuse to own, exported to somebody else. I don't deceive, they deceive. We're the city on a hill. They are the threat. When identity feels endangered and arousal spikes, that denial recruits projection, moral disengagement, and the story bending we use to keep ourselves pure. You can hear it in our myths and see it in their mirror. Land of liberty with slavery and Jim Crow humming underneath. Manifest destiny with indigenous disposition. Broken treaties and boarding schools buried in the footnotes. We don't conquer, we liberate, while the Philippines, Vietnam, and Iraq say otherwise. Rugged individualism that blesses guns, police impunity, and political assassination as if violence were a sacrament. The American dream on the marquee while structural inequality, wage stagnation, and wealth hoarding run backstage. We always self-correct as selective memory. Sanitized textbooks make forgetting a national pastime. Innovation and free markets that crowned Enron most innovative 6 years in a row, right up to cooked books and retirement accounts erased. This isn't a scold, it's a risk assessment. Communities do it too. In Tulsa, 1921, a prosperous black district was recast as a threat to quote-unquote order, and the shadow burned Greenwood to the ground while officials called it law. Left or right, nobody is exempt. Same human hardware, same defenses when shame, fear, or status loss bite. The clinical task isn't to shame a country, it's to name mechanisms and lower risk. That means stripping dehumanization out of our language, interrupting arousal before it turns into action, slowing rumor velocity so lies don't outrun correction, and building norms that make nonviolence the only acceptable outlet for grievance. It also means telling the truth about what we've denied. Because unowned material doesn't disappear, it organizes behavior. If America wants to be exceptional, here's the bar. Own what we've hidden, stop calling fellow citizens animals, and act like a democracy that can look in the mirror without breaking it. Not sentimental, clinical. This is Shrink the Nation, the American Shadow. All right, I'm David. I've got my 20 plus years in the military. I'm still board certified somehow. Nobody's taken that away yet. I'm drinking coffee today in the world's giantest mug with Dwight Schrute on it because false. That's why.
Hey, it's Rob. I'm actually also drinking coffee this evening, although that's just so I can stay awake through the remainder of this taping. Different side of the world right now. 25 years as a psychiatrist, 30 years in the military.
I was admiring your confidence and the excitement of this episode. Your coffee late at night.
Oh, this is one of my favorite topics, to be honest. Jung gets me excited. He's my hero.
And I'm Allison. I'm here drinking iced coffee and a bespoke lime sparkling water. I did handcraft it myself.
Wow. Invisible labor.
It's true. The person who runs the soda stream and or carbonation system is the real hero here. I also have 20-ish years of psychiatry, no military.
We'll keep you around.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Anyway,
we do.
patriarchy doesn't.
For our tens of listeners, you're actually listening to the equivalent of 3 generations of psychiatrists. I was a staff doc during Allison's training. Dave was a resident when Allison was a staff doc. As always, I'm the old guy.
Yes, you are.
You hit a certain point in your life and it's just that's how it is. All right, so let's start off with defining the shadow, and you touched on it. In essence, it is the disavowed parts of ourselves. So we're talking about emotions, memories, beliefs, anything that is uncomfortable to sit with, anything that we do not like about ourselves, we're going to push it off into our shadow. Basically the equivalent of the basement. We're going to push it into the basement. We're going to pretend like it doesn't exist. The problem is that if you do not integrate your shadow, it will hijack your behavior. And oftentimes, for just our tens of listeners, if you're wondering what's in my shadow and how do I know when it's coming out? Well, I'll tell you. If you are in the midst of a situation and your emotion is far in excess of that situation, then you are probably responding to a childhood emotion, and it is probably coming directly from your shadow. This is a Carl Jung quote, so a drink.
Drink.
Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In other words, you'll be powerless to make truly independent decisions and just keep finding yourself in the same situations over and over and over again. And the answer is not to give into it or to avoid it, it's to understand it and integrate it as part of your personality. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, because the shadow, from Jung's standpoint, it can exist at the individual level, at the family level, the community level, the national level. And hopefully we can elucidate that a little bit and get to the brass tacks of how, in order to be a fully integrated nation, what we need to do to deal with the United States' shadow.
As we've spoken about on several episodes, projection plays a big role in the shadow. When I can't tolerate a trait myself, I export it. Clinically, we have these disowned impulses that are attributed to an outgroup, something outside of ourselves. In politics, chronic lying becomes the media are liars. We're basically taking something unacceptable that we feel about ourselves and we're seeing it in somebody else. There's also moral disengagement. How do decent people justify harm by relabeling collateral damage, diffusing responsibility? Everyone's doing it. Advantageous comparisons. At least we're not as bad as them.
They do it too. The first thing we hear now, if one side or the other is caught doing something.
We have cognitive dissonance, which, surprise, surprise, is showing up again. When our facts collide with our identity, our mind is going to bend the facts. We change our beliefs, we reinterpret evidence or attack the messenger to preserve our virtuous self-story. We move goalposts. We'll have a sudden redefinition of standards. We'll want to shoot the referee. I like sports metaphors. Stop looking at me like that, Allison.
I thought you were going to whip out the chariot metaphor again from way back.
That has to do with the id, the ego, and the superego, not cognitive dissonance. All right. Motivated reasoning. We'll see that of the shadow. Reasoning as a lawyer, not a judge. We search for arguments that keep the self or the tribe pure, and then we discard the rest. There's a historical extreme. We can use the Aryan myth, totalizing origin story to sanctify the brutality, basically saying it's okay to do this because we're the pure people, usually using one-sided evidence streams, asymmetrical skepticism. We'll put microscopes on their claims, but we'll use megaphones for ours. There's collective narcissism, also within the shadow, a fragile national self-image that demands praise and punishes critique. Group esteem hinges on superiority. Criticism feels like attack, and then we invite retaliation. We'll have grievance over disrespect, exaggerated insults to the nation or the in-group, and then calls to silence the critics.
These are some really big abstract ideas. I think sometimes it can be easier to see these play out in family systems. Most people either have a family or know a family. It's easier to identify other people's shadows, of course, than it is our own.
You really went out on a limb there, didn't you?
Yeah, why are you assuming everybody has a family? Just so inconsiderate. For tens of
Some people
listeners,
don't.
we will be your family, tens of listeners, if you don't have one.
That is so sweet. We all need a sense of belonging. So it can be easier to see these in a family system. Very often what I see play out clinically is grandpa is a good man because he provides for our family. Therefore, he couldn't have done what you are saying he did. So that's the shadow. Grandpa's bad acts are then considered invisible or not acknowledged. On a personal level, what we can see play out is, well, I'm a good person, so it's okay that I took $20 from the offering plate or did something wrong, but I know I'm a good person. So that means the thing that I did couldn't be wrong. Glenn Gabbard talks about this in a really interesting way. Glenn Gabbard is a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, treats physicians a lot, like physicians who get into trouble with licensure agencies. And he talks about how physicians, when they get in trouble, they will say, well, I'm better now. I'm a different person now. I was bad then, now I'm good. And they can't integrate that the past them, who in this case usually like had sex with a vulnerable patient, can't integrate the vulnerabilities of that person with who they are currently. And that's part of the work that he does, is to get them to integrate what shadow essentially led them to do to take advantage of people.
Yeah. So, just for the audience, Allison has extra extensive training in psychotherapy specifically. Excited to have her. I realize you may not always work from a Jungian frame, but most of the framework where we might engage in psychotherapy has kind of the equivalent. And even if you're not utilizing it in therapy, when you see it. So, from your experience working with individuals, how does this act as a barrier to them getting better?
If you can't acknowledge that it was you who did the bad thing, there's no coming to terms with it in the present. So there's no making amends for what you did. And there's no ability to conceptualize that you could ever do a bad thing in the future. The idea that we are all both good and bad all the time is really difficult. The nuance of, I like to think of myself as a good person, really gets obliterated if we can't accept that we're sometimes good, sometimes bad. It just causes us to disavow it. And then we accidentally do stuff that's pretty bad without meaning to and without understanding, really.
I accidentally did that thing.
You couldn't see my air quotes.
I couldn't.
Radio is not great for non-verbal
Signals very well.
I accidentally cheated on my partner. And you'll talk to the person and you're like, well,
confessing
what
to
do you
a
mean? And
lot.
they're like, well, this is how he finds out.
Taking money from the donation tray, cheating on your partner.
Last time it was the drinking and the smoking during pregnancy, and it just
Now it's the philandering, pilfering.
It's true. I'm
the
just
P
out
words.
here in the streets. When you talk to people, they really are mystified by how they could have done a bad thing. When you look at the bigger picture, you're like, well, of course you did. You were too busy pretending that you're a completely perfect person.
Yeah.
Then, of course, it's going to sneak up on you.
And for folks listening, the dynamic of that, what one could theorize at least, is that these individuals grew up in a family system in which imperfection was not tolerated. So they took that fear of imperfection, the lesson that they learned from their parents, and they push it in their shadow. And really what we're talking about is their subconscious. They will not face it. It is behind them, like the shadow tends to be in the dark. And when they are subjected to this evidence that, hey, there's more to me than what I'm willing to accept, it creates a great deal of cognitive dissonance and anxiety. That's an extreme example, but it's much more common, at least from my experience doing psychotherapy, to see folks who are struggling with really normal emotional experiences like anger. And somewhere along the line, they've been taught anger is just not appropriate, not acceptable. You cannot express anger. And these are the people who are unassuming. They tend to very rarely lose their temper. But the problem is that when they do, it is exaggerated. It's an explosion. And that was Jung's point, that whatever your issue might be, whatever is in that shadow, if you don't deal with it, it will guide you and it will take control of you. He liked the term possession. You would be possessed by it. And it's one of the reasons why I like Jung. There's an incredible poetic flair to the way he wrote and how he articulated things. The arc of this episode, that's really what we're driving at, is that the need for us as a nation to identify what is our national shadow is because until we do, until we face it, we're going to find ourselves, one, repeating old patterns over and over again, and two, not progressing.
I want to underscore the fact that the shadow, the subconscious, however you want to frame it, it exists in everybody. It's not only certain people, certain groups. The potential is there for everybody. If you're listening to this and wondering whether you have that shadow, yes.
You do.
Yes, you do. Just as we all do, who are even talking about this, except for Allison, I think, who doesn't have a shadow because she's just
I don't
glowing,
know.
glows with a light.
Well, she
become unhinged roughly 36 hours ago, and I'm only just now getting all the hinges put back on.
Okay, well then Allison has a shadow too.
I feel like there's an inordinate number of Freudian slips in the fact that she often uses I statements when she's telling stories about others. It's phrased in terms of I.
Usually say we with my patients, and it makes
Do
it
you?
easier for, yeah, I do. I say we
I do too.
have really big feelings. For me, I think outwardly I don't seem like somebody who has big feelings, but on the inside they're really big. So
Have you ever
I
met
really...
I'm not sure you have a
I
lot of
think
insight here. Maybe sit in front of the mirror. You have big feelings.
usually seem relatively contained. I think most people have not seen me really upset, except you, David, when I yelled at you for messing up or something. But no, I do with my patient, and it just makes it so much easier for us to to all acknowledge, yeah, I really lose my temper.
Nobody is immune.
No, nobody.
I bring it up because as we're talking about this, anybody who's listening, as you said, it's easy to see it in others. It's so hard to see it in yourself, but everybody has that. So pointing fingers and saying, well, you do, it's just, that's more outgroup mentality and placing blame. And the purpose of this discussion is to have everyone understand what this presents as, how this works, to help you see it in yourself as well as others, but to have more compassion, more grace for others, because it is so hard to see it that it drives a lot of what we do, especially the unpleasant things that we do. And a big part of surviving as a democracy is to have that grace for others to some extent. Doesn't mean we just excuse terrible behaviors, but we understand that I got to fix my shit before I start calling out everybody else on there and becoming combative, angry, violent at others when you're doing the same exact thing, just from your own perspective, and you're rationalizing it.
Yes, absolutely. When we were envisioning doing this podcast, and this is after what, Dave, maybe 7 years of an ongoing text string that we would go back and forth on political topics. And of course, from our frame, we would always think in terms of the psychology, the psychodynamics behind it. And that's what makes this so challenging, and what makes a nation the size of ours so challenging, is that it is a collection of individuals, and each one of us has, and this is not pejorative, I'm not criticizing anyone, and I will be the first to admit I've got a bucket load of psychopathology sitting right here next to me at my desk. But when you start to stack that up, you stack it up and you get families. And as Allison mentioned before, which was a great example, so sexual abuse or abuse in general is a good example how reconciling that the head of the household is both an abuser and a provider that we need. It's challenging, and you push that into the shadow and you don't deal with it, and it has downstream ramifications to everyone else in that household, and they grow up with secrecy and silence as a part of their core identity. And then you take these families and you put them together and you get communities. So it's a collection of everybody's shadow. And I'm going to use, from a community example, I'm going to use Tulsa in 1921. It was the largest race massacre in the U.S. Somewhere between 1 and 300 African Americans were murdered in the span of a couple of days. 10,000 were displaced. An interesting little fact, and I cannot figure out who was flying the aircraft, but it was the first use of aircraft to firebomb in apparently history. So on U.S. soil in Tulsa, and the area of Tulsa, Greenwood, which was also often referenced the Black Wall Street, it just so happened to be inhabited by a group of mostly African Americans who had found some success and some economic stability. And it all started because there was an accusation that there was an assault on a white woman. To the best of the ability to piece it together, it sounds like a man stumbled and put his hand on a woman's arm, and then that took off, and the lie makes it around the world before the truth gets out of the gate. And that's what initiated it. The citizenry of Tulsa went into this area of Tulsa and killed people and destroyed the city. And then they denied it. Claims were denied, records were burned, the survivors were silenced. It was completely covered up right up until just before the 100-year anniversary. And then there were some documentaries and more attention to it. When you push something like that, deny it, cover it up, it has downstream ramifications. Tulsa ended up experiencing many, many, many years of mistrust and inequity, unfinished grief. And people who are listening might think, that's not so bad. But from another standpoint, this was a flourishing area of Tulsa. Not only did they experience these long downstream consequences of the community, but they also missed out on significant opportunity in that time by, one, not controlling it, but two, not identifying it and taking responsibility for it and making it part of their history. Instead, they pretended like it didn't happen.
A lot of people, even from there, were not aware. It was expunged from the collective memory so successfully that so many people were surprised to learn about this around the 100th anniversary of it. That level of surprise also says something that despite our country's history, how are we continually surprised by these atrocities that are covered up, and then we hear about them and then move on from? I guess I would hope that we could have some integration into our collective psyche about how these things keep happening. One of the other examples that I was thinking of is another aerial bombing of America by Americans is 1985 in Philadelphia. I don't know who had the helicopter or airplane, but they bombed Philadelphia. And it was, again, a Black activist that was bombed, and like 61 houses were destroyed. Yeah, it's wild.
I have no recollection of that, and I would have absolutely been of an age that should have hit my radar. The audience does not know this, but we lost David.
No, he's probably going to watch the PBS documentary called The Largely Forgotten History of Philadelphia's Police Bombing on Black Organization Move.
David is back. I suppose the interesting thing there is that not only is that an example of a community shadow, it is a manifestation of a national shadow, of the long-term dissonance that comes with slavery. That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And that was written at a time where a significant portion of the American population were slaves. And they didn't have freedom. And in many ways, definitely something that doesn't sit well with us. And in fact, to this day, people will get angry if you even bring that up. Their gut instinct is to get angry as a defense. Why are you still talking about that? Well, because it's a huge part of our history. But that is a part of the national shadow. And that national shadow translated into racism, Jim Crow laws, and then led to incidents such as Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I do think we also have to acknowledge that our country was built on genocide, that the Puritans came here, settled, colonized, and then in the course of the next couple hundred years, obliterated numerous collections of people in a very systematic way. You can see the primary source pamphlets for killing buffalo. I forget what the saying is, but it's like every dead buffalo is like a dead insert slur here for Indigenous Native American. And there were tourist trains that rode out, and you could just like shoot buffalo from the train, not to keep, not to use, but just to further the genocide of Native people.
One of the things I think is interesting about the community shadow is that something like Greenwood could occur in the 1920s because of the complete lack of record keeping that existed at that time and the ability for the community to cover that up. I think a misconception that people have today is that that would be impossible to do because we are so connected, because everybody has cell phones in their pockets. They can take the videos and record everything. But you're already seeing now how the community shadow, even the national shadow, is starting to take effect in this idea that that video is not real, AI created it. So anything that we find uncomfortable or unsettling, even if you have a visual representation of it, you have audio of it, you have all the reason to believe that this did occur, you're convincing yourself, or the community is convincing itself it's not real because, well, now that's just made up. Or to go along with what we talked about before, the echo chambers that we are creating for ourselves, where we're only getting the information that we like, is creating a shadow in that you're not seeing the uncomfortable negative things that your side is doing. And you're happily living within that to keep that bias going.
Yeah, absolutely. Motivated narratives. It's so easy to come up with a story. And now we can just say, hey, it's AI. It was AI. It wasn't real. And that's the scary thing. You don't wipe these things out in a day. Memory doesn't work that way. So in efforts to, say, whitewash history books or take certain exhibits out of museums, and you think that can't work. Well, it doesn't work in a month. It doesn't work in 6 months. But in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, the memory starts to fade. And we do still have that capability. And sure, the internet's a vast thing. We can go and we can search it out and probably find it, but you got to know what you're looking for. So it is very possible to manipulate the history books to this day.
The 24-hour news cycle has created a new shadow. The second something new happens, you forget about the old. We're using the internet as if it's this ledger for everything that's occurred. But really, there's so much information that we're being bombarded with that by the time you have the new outrage, you've forgotten the old one completely, creating its own shadow. It's providing this space where even if we know it occurred, we have forgotten it because we're on to the next thing. What we're seeing is that politicians and public figures are really living and taking advantage of being in that shadow because it's just move on to the next thing. A really great example of this is that you'll see anything negative that might be coming out in politics. You see this in the NFL. They'll drop their news late on a Friday because by Monday, it's completely forgotten. It's the power of that news cycle. We're on to the next thing. It's fascinating. We have this idea that, well, we can't forget anything. It's all there. Sure. But when you have a billion other things happening, you just forget that it occurred.
And the point there is that with so much coming at us, it is difficult to integrate any singular event because the news cycle does move so fast. So truly assessing it and integrating it into our sense of self as a nation is difficult. We've touched on a couple of shadow topics, but I think there's a few more that are very relevant to the things that we're currently experiencing. One that jumps out at me is violence. Violence is an identity. So we've recently seen some violent episodes that have occurred. And certainly, I mean, we're all very much aware of mass shootings, et cetera. So the myth we're working under is this rugged individualism. Americans are able to defend themselves. It's an issue of freedom. And what that ends up doing is creating a shadow of gun violence, police brutality, and political assassination, which we normalize violence as patriotic almost at this point, but refuse to name it as an illness. And every time we have a mass shooting, we get the same talking points over and over again from both sides. And it reflects this. One side is saying this is pathologic, and the other side is saying it's freedom, the manifestation of our God-given Second Amendment right.
And I think that the history of policing in America is so interesting too. It's an outcropping of chattel slavery. Policing in America started as slave patrols that would round up enslaved people who had escaped their torment. Like, if that's the history of our policing, I do think it's a big ask for them to be responding to mental health crises. So they were formed for something else. I do think that acknowledging that would let us go a long way to forming a functional crisis response so that we're not shooting people who are in the midst of a mental health crisis. I think that could be really helpful for us.
When I have these discussions with a lot of folks, what they struggle with is the relevance here. There's a certain hyper morality. I'll use a different example so I can paint this picture. So we have a mythology in America of us as being the home of immigrants. We've got the Statue of Liberty, and there's that beautiful poem, give us your poor, you're hungry. Do you have it memorized? Seemed like you did.
No, I do not have it memorized.
Right. It looked like you were just ready to. Anyway, I got it. It's right here. But that's the mythology. And we embrace that mythology now. And I'm not even talking about immigration today, which has its own set of struggles. But if you go back through the history of immigration, it was not easy to immigrate here. We would accept lots of people. There wasn't that pushback. But being an immigrant in the United States was challenging. Go back to each wave of immigration and the hatred that was poured upon these immigrants that were coming in by folks who were already here. I think of the Irish that came here in the middle 1800s, what they ended up facing, and many of them just got pressed into service in the Civil War. And you can go with each new generation of immigration and see the struggle that they had, that it just doesn't necessarily fit with the mythology, the story we want to tell, what we embrace, what we say, gee, look how good we are, but it doesn't necessarily fit.
That is a really interesting picture to then talk about wealth inequality now.
Absolutely.
We have this idea that anybody can come here and they can bootstrap themselves up to a billionaire level. And the reality is that people are born into a class that it's easy to slip down in socioeconomic status. It's really difficult to climb, and with our middle class shrinking and our worker protections evaporating, it just gets harder and harder. And yet our 24-hour news cycle keeps pushing this idea that the poorest of us can be a billionaire. So let's go ahead and let's reduce the billionaire taxes because one day that could be me. When reality is my rent-to-own couch is getting repoed. That's the next thing that I'm admitting to besides drinking and smoking and whatever else.
Philandering was the other thing you admitted to.
My bad. I forgot about that. Gosh, my husband's going to be really upset that we lost the couch too. He's going to be.
Yeah. Yep. Poor David is having a really difficult day when it comes to the internet. In keeping with that, why is it that is an entrenched belief? I have actually had these conversations with folks across the economic spectrum. And why is it held so dear? That idea that this reverence for the billionaire, can always find a billionaire that maybe, I don't know exactly where Jeff Bezos started, but I know it was not the humblest of beginnings, but it was not much. But I think the odds on success like that is probably smaller than winning the lottery.
I think it's the same thing as the lottery, isn't it? That wish that this could be me. I could be a mega million. What are they called? What is the lottery called? I have very intense feelings about the lottery. Mega Millions.
You're going to win it? Is that the feeling? Or it takes advantage of the poor?
It exploits the poorest people with the impossible hope that they'll win the lottery. And if they've ever watched a lottery-winning documentary, they know it actually just ruins your life. I've watched all of them. It ruins your life. You do not want to win the lottery.
So you sit there drinking and smoking with your boyfriend, watching.
Just steal 20s out of the collection plate like Allison does.
Right.
Exactly.
And then use that 20 to buy a mega millionaire.
That's how I get ahead in life.
Hey, it's Rob from Shrink the Nation. As my friend David so eloquently states at the beginning of the show, we are clinicians, but we're not your clinician. We love to joke around and dive into the tough topics, but there's something really important we need to say. If you're struggling with your mental health or facing substance use issues, we want you to know you're not alone. We have dedicated our professional careers to mental health, and we care deeply about it. It's okay to ask for help. Reaching out to a professional in your area could be the first step toward feeling better. Don't wait. There's support out there, and it works. Please take that first step. We want you to be well. Now let's get back to the show. Oh, and don't tell David I said he was eloquent. He'll be insufferable.
I'm going to go back to immigration. That there is a certain reality that completely open borders is just not possible. So it runs into the practical. There's the ideal, and then there's the practical. And holding those two things can be very challenging in and of themselves when you start to factor in also some of the inequities, the poor treatment that many of our immigrants have experienced. It creates this broad spectrum that is difficult to sit with, and it does almost beg for simplicity. You have to find some place where you sit with this. And how do we do that?
I think our minds hate nuance. That's the only thing I can ever come up with, is that there's something so comforting about things being all good or all bad that our minds just are terrified at the idea of nuance, that people can be good and bad, and that it's just so much easier if we know that our dear leader is all good and would never hurt us. Even if he's doing things to hurt us, he doesn't mean it. It's an accident. He's not doing it. It's actually Antifa. Those kinds of things. It's just so comforting to be able to hold on to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
I see that also when people are diagnosed with cancer. Cancer is this actual, real physical shadow that if it grows in us and we pretend that we're fine, that we don't have cancer, it just keeps growing and destroying. That's how I see the shadow in us, that if we don't address it, do our radiation, do our chemo, get our surgery, that it will kill us, rot us from the inside.
David, welcome back.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, poor David has really struggled. Apparently, one of your kids keeps falling off of the treadmill that you need to run out there in the sticks to keep the internet going.
Yeah, no, I yelled at him to get off his lazy ass.
Pedal faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you had it hooked up to an exercise bike, actually.
No, it's a treadmill.
Okay.
This is almost an unavoidable process. It requires perpetual self-evaluation, even for us humans, that I don't care how many times life has taught me a lesson about myself. Amnesia is persisting and perpetual problem. I learn the lesson. I think, gosh, now I know. And then I move forward and I find myself through repetition compulsion being in the same place where I've been before. And then I remember, wait, I learned this once before. And that's kind of from a national standpoint. It's not just that we have to be in perpetual analysis of ourselves. It's also generational. For our nation, it's not that this generation can learn the lessons and then move, but we have to stay on top of it for the next generation to learn the lessons and move forward and integrate this. And therein lies the rub. So who benefits from this? This perpetuation of the shadow, who benefits?
Gosh, I think the people who make things very clear and easy to understand. There's good and bad.
Absolutely. Politicians that are the most skillful at splitting, at projecting, at supporting non-nuanced viewpoints do tend to benefit from this shadow in some of the arguments that you can see. And again, this is a guy that's served the better part of his life, well over half my life. In the military, I believe in the idea of the United States deeply. I believe we are an exceptional nation. Historically, I believe that we have made errors and lots. And I think that's the point, that when I have this conversation and even bring up these past transgressions, these failures, and these points where we did not live up to our ideals, it seems like I'm criticizing us, and I'm not any more than I would criticize a patient for the struggles that they have, or well, I do criticize myself for the struggles that I have, but you know, that's a personal thing. It's possible to be exceptional and flawed.
Yeah, and that if we maintain that we are an exceptional country, we are able to admit our flaws. We are strong enough to admit, yes, this happened. Yes, we are doing better. That shows even more strength. But if you don't have nuance, if you aren't able to hold those conflicts in your mind at the same time, it just short circuits you. It zaps your poor brain.
I would argue the people who benefit the most from the shadow only do so for a finite period of time. It is only beneficial in the moment or shortly thereafter. On a national level, that can be years. It certainly can be. But as you've said before, the chickens will always come home to roost. Taking advantage of short attention spans and miscommunications, misinformation is only helpful until it's not. Because history doesn't change. If it takes 100 years, it takes 100 years. But even with Tulsa, eventually the truth gets out. It may not affect them right now, but it will. The ability to tolerate our imperfections, to sit with the fact our history has not been perfect, but we can still grow from it. We can learn from our mistakes and do better. That's the goal.
I often think of this with patients, that we are a set of ideals, and it's difficult to think of yourself as just a set of ideals, but we can be very proud of the ideals that this nation was built on. It was an exceptional group of individuals who utilized the best information they had based on the experiences they had in world history to develop a system. And they really did incorporate a lot of wonderful ideas into our founding documents. And that's really what we are. And I know for a lot of people, you talk about the United States, they think of a landmass. I mean, your immediate gut instinct is to probably see the shape of the U.S., a physical thing. And the same with people. When they think of themselves, they think of their own body, they think of their experience as a living, breathing organism, but really they're just a set of ideals. And if you can see it that way, it's much easier that the ideals can be great. The execution can, what do we say in the army is,
I like your effort and your execution is lacking.
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't know.
Yeah, we say it slightly different.
I think the perfect example of this, the nuance here that we need, is that Thomas Jefferson is such an important figure in American history, had so many wonderful ideas, did so much work, had a secret, but probably not even a secret, had a second family with his wife's half-sister who he owned and enslaved. The closest living relative currently is Black, a Black descendant, and it's just so interesting. What's his house called?
Monticello.
In the last couple of years, they did some excavating and discovered that she had a room in the disgusting little basement, and that's where she lived. And it's really interesting.
Thank you, Allison, for taking us even further far afield. All right, how about some prescriptions?
I would love to start. Thank you.
You do not get to start. No, you're a bummer.
I am a bummer.
Yeah.
You're a buzzkill.
I thought that's why you had me on this show, to be the sad reminder of the shadow. That's literally my function on this show, you all.
It is.
No, we love having you, but you don't get to start off prescriptions because you kill our vibe. You kill the buzz.
One time I bring up an excellent written book by Chanel Miller, very clearly explicating her sexual assault, and then I don't get to start prescriptions anymore.
Correct.
Yeah.
You made Rob cry.
Yeah, you are the death of fun.
It's true. Tell that to my lotto ticket in my repoed pouch.
Yeah, I'll start. So another quote is that you don't achieve enlightenment through imagining sources of light. You achieve it by bringing what is in the dark forward. So my sense is that if there's a solution here, it is reinvigorating civic and history education to our kids. They really do need to know the full scope of American history. And we've done better jobs in the past. I think after the 60s, toward the end of the 70s, there's this cliche image of a teacher who's like from the movie Dazed and Confused. Remember, the founding fathers were a bunch of wealthy men who didn't want to pay their taxes. So, and that is a way to look at them. And there's probably truth to it, but that doesn't mean what they did wasn't great. So my prescription is that we absolutely have to invigorate the education of our youth, and we have to make sure that we're not whitewashing and or deleting parts of our history.
That's a good one. I have one for the individual level. A simple thing that anybody can do. Take an actual piece of paper or a spreadsheet. I don't care. Have fun with it. 2 columns. Use Word. On the left, put the accusations that you are making about the outgroup. And then on the right, any evidence of the same tendency in your in-group or yourself. And then maybe just one fix that you can control in yourself. Just a way to understand your own shadow, especially as you're applying it to others. Fix yourself before you start casting stones.
Okay, Allison, kill fun.
Okay, there's a hilarious... I started following him on Twitter when it was
She's
Twitter.
using air quotes.
His name's Michael Harriot. He's a journalist. He is so smart, so funny. And he has a book called Black AF History, the Unwhitewashed Story of America. And yeah, it's a total bummer, and it's necessary. If you would like something appropriate for kids, my recommendation is A Young People's History of the United States. It's an adapted version of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. It's very good and tells so many stories that I had not heard that didn't make it into my high school history class, where I learned that states' rights were the reason for the Civil War. So that's actually what I learned in history class. Color me surprised when it turned out that it was actually the states' rights that they wanted to have was slavery. That was omitted from my history class.
Yeah, there was only one state right that they really were fighting over.
Yeah, it was slavery.
Yeah.
So those.
Yeah, it wasn't the right to like set speed limits. There was just one.
Oh my gosh, I literally got talked to by my physical therapist who was talking about speed limits and states' rights. And I said, oh, no. He has me on the treadmill and I'm telling him the history of America. So if you think that I just bring this energy to this podcast, I'm out here doing the Lord's work, trying to get my head back in its socket. And I'm freaking talking to this stupid-ass dipshit about states' rights being slavery. Anyway, Those are my recommendations.
Okay. Big emotions, folks.
But tell us how you really feel. And don't sugarcoat it this time, Allison.
Big emotions
Do you know how many deep breathing exercises I had to do?
just to get through.
It was difficult for me.
How many times did you tell yourself, I need my hip? I really need my hip. So I'm just going to get through.
I don't need it that bad, and I
Right.
quit. I won't patronize a work that has those ideas.
One last thought before we bring this meandering thing to a close.
It's your fault. You brought up speed limits.
I did. And this is just in general when you live in your life. When you're really annoyed by something, the first question, and this flows really with what David said, but the first question you should ask yourself is really, what is it about them that reminds me of me? And if you frame that, every time you get frustrated with someone, every time you're upset, look for the similarities, because I bet you'll find them. It's the things about ourselves, the things that live in our shadow, that we are going to be most sensitive out in the world, that we are going to see out in the world. And it's a healthy habit to get into.
Nationally, if we can just remember George Santayana saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Later, it was paraphrased by Churchill, but our country can grow and get better if we accept our flaws and make the changes necessary to stop doing such terrible, horrible shit.
Stop doing bad things, people.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Stop saying stupid shit.
My favorite quote in any movie is from Jim Carrey in Liar Liar. Stop breaking the law, asshole.
All right. Always a pleasure, folks.
But everyone who stuck around, and I'm glad that I was able to make it back, thank you for listening. And go to our website, shrinkthenation.com. Sign up for our newsletter that Robbie puts together every week and is actually pretty good. Hit up our socials, smash that subscribe, hit like. Thank you, Allison, so much.
Bonus episode coming up later this week.
Don't expect anything funny, but
No.
it's a pretty serious episode.
Is it just me talking about sad things?
It's a bonus episode of just the uncut hour of Allison reading Chanel Miller's book unabridged in 1 hour somehow. No, actually, it's a half hour look at political violence. Very serious topic. So we're not going to go into jokes. It's a real problem. Other than that, thank you so much. Until next time, we will cue up that music. We are out.